Working as a traveling videographer on a corporate job. This video is sponsored by Audio. A bunch of you frequently ask me about where I get my music from in these videos, and everything you're hearing today is from Audio. So for those wondering, I've linked a handy playlist to the tracks that I use pinned at the top of the comments section. I've been pretty open with the internet about how I make a living over the last few years, and I want to keep it that way. But let's just keep this between you and me, because I do a couple of corporate gigs as a one-man band videographer setup with some repeat clients every year. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But as someone who largely directs, it's not great for that perception thing that I so often talk about. So just on the off chance there are any producers, creatives or agencies watching this, please remember that I do direct and EP things that look like this. But a man's got to make a living. I love to travel new places, and with this particular client, I love them too. We have a 10-year-long working relationship now, so we go back, and together we've been some places and seen some things. This is repeat work, yes. But how did I get that very first job with them that has led to anywhere from 1 to 3 shoots a year since meeting and a couple of consultancy jobs for their growing in-house production team? When I first left school, I used to play in a band, Canterbury. Listen on Spotify. Heavy in the Day is a banger. But whilst I was doing this, I still worked as a freelance videographer, filming behind the scenes in the studios, things like that for other bands. A band we used to tour with, I managed to convince them to give me a shot when they had at the time their biggest London headline show to date. And I reached out saying I would shoot and edit a short doc around it for free if they just covered my travel expenses. They loved what I made, and when they were later approached by a software company to be part of some new musicians selling things to your fans app that wanted to make a case study video around the band and how they were using the app, the band said that I was their video guy. So I got the gig. The software company owner, who then liked what I'd made for him, had his fingers in a bunch of different pies, and over the next few years hired me to produce, edit, shoot various case study videos for some of the different companies that he was involved with, which at some point took me to Berlin in Germany to do a case study of this new sound technology and how the developers were working with this software company to make it all happen. The software company was called KDAB. On this shoot, I met Till, the chief commercial officer at KDAB. A few months after our first shoot, Till reached out to me personally to ask if I was available to work on something for them directly, and the rest is repeat work history. The economic climate has obviously changed greatly since we first worked together 10 years ago, as well as the quality of my work, subsequently my rates, the cost of software, kit, and the cost of travel. This is all different to what it was a decade ago, which brings us on to budget sign-off. I find with corporate clients, as opposed to commercial jobs, conversations about shoots start with a lot more advanced warning. Sabine, who works in marketing at the company and heads up the production arm, reached out to me at the end of December last year to ask if I was available during February or March for 1 day's worth of filming in Nuremberg, Germany. After some back and forth in early February, we settled on some dates that worked for them, the client would be filming, and myself. I was then asked for a quote based on the day's filming as well as for some edit deliverables. She wanted these in 2 different quotes to get signed off. As a videographer for this long-standing relationship, I think 10 years ago I was charging between £350 and £450 a day, which has slowly risen. And for the past 4 years for corporate clients, I've charged whatever is the going higher rate for a cinematographer based on APA rates here in the UK. These jobs generally require less prep than commercial jobs, and the higher rate for a cinematographer is not a bad rate by any stretch. I justify this because I'm doing more than just being a cinematographer. I'm bringing the experience of a director, a cinematographer, a sound op, and effectively, you're playing all of these different roles yourself. Because of my long-standing relationship with this particular company, however, I've always given them discounts on my rates as they've risen, as I have on this job with the edit fees. And usually I won't charge the typical half-day rate for travels, because their jobs tend to be within Europe in places I can fly into late the night before and then travel out either the night after we wrap or early the next morning to avoid missing out on any other work elsewhere. But for this particular job, because of the date and location when I went to book my travel, there was no way to do this. So I was going to be spending a minimum of 3 days of my time for this 1-day shoot. Because of this, I added on the 2 half-day rates for travel time. Other expenses, which either didn't exist when I first started working with this company or have vastly increased over the past decade, include a travel carnet for the kit, which I recharge at cost, the flights, which I estimated off the flight prices and additional luggage costs at the time of quoting, and a guesstimate for taxi costs at either end. There's also a line in there for my equipment. When I first started working with them, I was having to rent in everything I used because I didn't own anything. Now, at this point on this particular job, I own everything I was using. But I'll still have to buy some more kit and upgrade things as the years go on. So I continue to charge the client for this cost, actually at a cheaper rate than when I had to rent it myself for their jobs. So everyone is better off. Except some of the rental houses that I no longer need to rent this kit from. Unused to the travel day rates though, Sabine came back to me a few days later with a few concerns, asking if there was any flexibility with the filming costs. I went back explaining the reasoning as well as offering some alternate suggestions to bring the cost down, and she was really grateful for the explanation, which then led to the budget being signed off at my original quote. It's definitely an emotional maturity in myself that I do recognize, but when my rates are challenged on a job of this scale, I do find myself annoyed, to be totally honest, because I feel that over the years I've been more than fair with my pricing, even though I know it's nothing personal and it was asked in the most considered and honest way. I have a tendency to wear my emotions on my sleeve, even if it is over email. So as with any emotionally evoking emails, I took a beat and waited until the next day to respond, which was beneficial for both parties. Never act on emotion when work is involved, arguably at any point in life, but you know. I like to see new places for the first time, and this was my first trip to Nuremberg, but traveling for work does come with some added complications. I've previously made a video about traveling for work here, which you should definitely check out if you're looking to make the process as smooth as possible. But start by writing a checklist. Keep kit to a minimum. Travel with the camera body, lenses and batteries on board. Don't be an idiot and take your tools with you though, because they'll throw them in the bin at the security screening. And make sure to check if you need an ATA carnet in advance of travel in order to legally import the gear you're traveling with. Don't leave it a couple days before and risk not getting the carnet processed in time. For my stripped down videographer kit on this job, I packed my S1H, a 16 to 28mm Sigma lens, 35mm fixed Sigma lens, one 5-inch monitor with cables and a small rig arm for mounting, one variable ND filter, a Ronin gimbal, 6 camera batteries, 4 monitor batteries, 2 battery chargers, 3 EU plug adapters, and 1 plug extension. Because I couldn't really fit any more in my luggage. For the sound kit, I took one Zoom H4n recorder, a wireless Sennheiser lav kit, and spare rechargeable AA's. I also took 2 Tentacle syncs. These are more reliable because of the 32-bit float, and you never know when a client might throw a second interviewee into the mix on jobs like these, so it's always best to be prepared. I was going to take 2 lightweight stands, but I was buying a new one and it didn't turn up in time, so I took 1 stand and a Cardellini clamp. I took an Amarin F22X, 2 MCs, an Aperture ATC, 1 bag of crop clips, an additional diffusion sheet, and a black bed sheet, which was to use as negative fill. I'd normally always advise traveling with Peli cases, or at least hard cases for kit. But in this instance, I was trying to get as much with me without paying for overweight baggage fees. And I know when I start taking my larger Peli case that if I'd taken everything I wanted, we would have started to get dangerously close to the 32 kilogram limit. And the client already had concerns about money. So although this wasn't saving a lot, every little helps. So I got thrifty with my packing, using various cord bag lens pouches as some extra cushion for some precious items, and not unusually ending up cramming my clothes in around the kit, which helps for protection as well as space saving. By the time they'd signed off my quote, there was even less flights available than when I'd first looked. So the cheapest and most time efficient thing to do ended up being to travel out on the Monday night, even though we weren't shooting until the Wednesday. I figured I could work from the hotel on the Tuesday and explore a bit of Nuremberg in the afternoon, this city I thought I'd never been to before. So after a full morning of working on a treatment for another job I was pitching on, I head out for a lunchtime run around the local area in an effort to see some of it and get a little exercise in, as I've been pretty slack this year so far. And then I got on the train into Nuremberg, only to quickly realise I've actually been there before. How embarrassing. Turns out I shot here for another videographer-style corporate gig with Puma about 8 years ago. Still, it was good to live some life in amongst this work trip. So I sauntered around, walked up to the castle, got myself some naughty currywurst, and then headed back to the hotel just before darkness to work on my treatment some more. The shoot was both challenging and easy, contradicting terms I know. On these level of jobs, there's rarely much in terms of pre-production, particularly since their in-house team has been involved in coordinating things. I've come to accept it will be what it will be, and I'll work with what there is to on the day. After having received my security pass for the building and loaded in, I started by asking our host and main interviewee for a tour to see any and all possible filming spaces. It was, as so many of these places are, less than inspiring visually. So for the first interview, I'd set everything in the meeting room he'd booked for us for the day. At least it would work in terms of sound. And I'd spotted some plants and fruit around the office that I could use to art direct the space into something a bit less plain than what was there. I let everyone know that I'd probably need around an hour to set up. So Sabine, who was running the show, used the time to go through the questions with the interviewees from the company. The lights in the room were on a sensor, unreachable to tape off and unable to be isolated. So I used my black bedsheet, spare diffusion trace from the F22X, and the additional diffusion sheet I bought to control the lighting more to my liking, using the F22X for the key motivated from the window side. I wanted to use the AEC as a hair light, but there was nothing suitable to clamp the Cardellini off of. And time was pressing on, so I didn't end up using it. I'm not negative filling as aggressively as I would in a lot of my other work here. It's not often the vibe in the corporate world, even if I did have the tools available with me to do so. I chose to go handheld for this shoot with nothing more than this small rig cage from my S1H, allowing me to mount the monitor comfortably, which I then use effectively as a grip handle. Shooting handheld for these sorts of things when I don't have a second camera allows me to add some movement to the image and keep mixing up the framing as the interview progresses to try and keep it somewhat visually interesting and give some options for the edit. In addition to this, even though I wasn't the one conducting the interview, I'd occasionally ask for a repeat answer for camera's sake.
Can I just get you to repeat the start where you said...
Knowing that often the untrained interviewee's response would more often than not be stronger the second time, but also allowing me to get a variety of coverage of some very long answers to allow for a higher chance of cutting them down less obtrusively when it came to editing later. Like all multifaceted videographer jobs, I was in charge of the sound too. I was hardwired into the Zoom H4n, keeping an eye/ear on levels and for any clothing rustles as we went. Although there weren't too many of those, as on any job like this, I don't actually try and hide the lav mic. Obviously, it looks better if it is hidden, but when there's no sound person, I already have enough to be thinking about and managing without adding this variable complexity into the mix. Plus, it's a corporate video. Who actually cares about seeing the lav mic? There's no one watching this at the conference it'll be playing at thinking twice about that tiny black speck on his shirt. I pretty much learnt most of the information on the Monday, 2 days before the actual shoot, when I'd been sent over an overview in the form of a PDF. It's not until the day of I'm getting the definitive answer to how many people we're actually interviewing and what B-roll options there are to capture. Some of the B-roll requests hadn't been communicated to the company either, which limited a bit of what we were allowed to film on site. Nothing too exciting, but precious B-roll nonetheless. Partially due to the inexperience of the first of our two interviewees, and partially due to the inexperience of our interviewer, we ended up rolling for a little over 90 minutes across several hours. Absolutely no shade on either of them there. He wants to get it right, and she wants to make sure that she's covered in the edit. But we're only making a 1 minute and 3 minute edit out of all of this footage, and I've only budgeted for 3 days worth of editing, and that includes revisions and amends. So it's making me anxious, not only for the time it's going to take me to sift through it all and my lower back as I stoop over my camera with terrible posture, but also for the time that it's eating into when I should be getting that oh so necessary B-roll around campus. To make up on some time, we ended up shooting the second interview in this meeting room too, and just redressing. But in an ideal world, with the time that we originally had scheduled, I would have relocated to another location within the building that I'd earmarked in the morning when given the tour for some visual variety. Because as we all know, variety is the spice of life. It keeps things engaging, and corporate videos need all the help they can get in that area. Also, fortunately, unfortunately, it turned out our B-roll options were incredibly limited, which stresses me out a little, not because I find any of this stimulating or because I deeply feel passionate about the subjects that are being discussed, but because I want to do a good job. Corporate gig or not, I want the client to be happy. I want to look at the edit at the end of it all and know that I've done the best with what was available to me. But the lack of B-roll options was a little stifling. I could really see that I was going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel to make this work in the edit. So I was going to have to get creative. And I don't mean that in a fun way. I was already suggesting the idea of using some cheaper stock libraries if they had any existing subscriptions we could use to help with visually telling the story. Because corporate talking head or not, it is ultimately trying to tell a story, albeit a short one. Those MCs I'd packed, in case you were wondering, were lights just in case for the unknown B-roll. It's always good to have a little arsenal of kit for any situation when you can. And these were small, lightweight, battery-powered lights that could have come in useful. They just didn't. The easy side of these jobs is the structured corporate hours these companies so often work to. We'd met for our security passes at 9 a.m. We had an hour for lunch at 12. We'd left the building at 5:30, and we were some of the last ones to leave. So compared to other areas of the industry, these hours are dreamy. Our hosts took us out for dinner, which was a delicious and enjoyable part of this job. Getting to know strangers a bit better, if only for a short while, trying food and drink in a foreign land and have it all paid for by someone else is pretty great. On this evening, I wasn't feeling particularly present, as I was feeling the pressure of the looming deadline for the treatment on the other job I've been working on, knowing full well that when I got back to the hotel, I was going to have to do a few hours work on it before I could go to sleep that night. This is the freelance life. Sometimes it all works out nicely, but so very often you're juggling multiple overlapping tasks. I would have had another beer and then headed back to the hotel to read my book for the evening before getting up early to catch my flight home. But no matter what they tell you, you can't have it all the time. Just after 6 a.m, I slightly more chaotically crammed my clothes back in around the kit and left for the airport. I had to deal with carne on the way home on both sides as well as on the way out. So although my flight wasn't until 10 a.m, I always allow plenty of time when there's a carne to deal with, as I once spent over 2 hours having it processed in Mexico City airport. You just never know how long these things are going to take in other countries. My bag was somehow 2 kilograms heavier on the way home than it was on the way out, despite having the exact same contents. So the legends at Ryanair added on an extra 30 quid for the pleasure. I loathe traveling with this airline, but they are so often the only option. More time working on my looming treatment deadline in the airport, and then for the length of the flight too. I made it home in time for lunch before an afternoon of meetings. Now able to park this job mentally for a few days at least. The post-production went a little differently on this job to similar ones of the sort. As I mentioned up front, I'd quoted just 3 days editing time for 2 deliverables. A 3-minute cut for their YouTube channel and website, as well as a 60-second cut down of that for the opening video at a conference they'd be presenting at. I'd expressed my concern on the shoot to Sabine at the length of these interviews and making it all still happen in the time that I quoted for edit-wise. Fortunately, as she heads up the company's in-house production and was keen to keep everything within budget, she very helpfully went away with the longer of the 2 interviews and narrowed it down to just 5 minutes of her own selects for me to work from when I got started a week or 2 later. However, this 5 minutes of interview footage was what was intended to be the 60-second cut down, not the full edit. I'd quoted my time based off of previous edits of a similar nature and with the idea of extracting the 60 from the larger edit, not the other way around. But it turned out we were doing the shorter video before the longer edit. And as it currently stands at the time of publishing this video, I've not actually done the second edit yet, as I'm still waiting on notes for that. But we're currently at a little over 2 out of the 3 days worth of edit time quoted for. But we can cross that bridge when it comes to it. I trimmed and tightened the interview rushes where I saw fit, whilst trying to still maintain all the info they wanted covered in the video. Then I headed to the website of the sponsor of today's video, Audio. When I first started working with KDAB, I think we were paying upwards of £140 per song to license for a video. An edit that will quite honestly only ever be seen by a few hundred, if that, prospective clients for this company. Not thousands or millions. And KDAB aren't some huge corporate multi-glomerate. They're a company with less than 100 employees worldwide. So Audio is the perfect licensing platform to source from for them. For this video, I headed to Audio's Hands AI recommended search feature and simply typed exciting and tech-focused track that accompanies a narrative that underlines a problem before presenting a solution. And it gave me these 6 options to listen to. I had a clear favourite immediately, but wanted some backup options in my pocket in case the client came back not liking it. So I downloaded 3 of the suggestions and got to work with the structure on my favourite one. Even if you don't plan on signing up today, you should definitely check out Audio's website and see what they've got to offer. Follow the link at the top of my description. And if you do decide to sign up, use code PETER70 at checkout for a whopping 70% off your first year of Audio Pro on what is already an incredibly reasonably priced platform. Thank you so much to Audio for sponsoring this video. So after I'd laid out this incredibly Frankenstein interview to get this closer to the length the client wanted, which at this stage was more like 2 minutes than 1, but for this first pass, I thought, let's just hit all the notes that they've asked for. And if it absolutely needed to come down to 60 seconds, then they'll need to make the decisions on what we lose, because that's a little beyond my pay grade, even though I'd be happy to make suggestions. I went about picking out sections of the interview that were less Frankensteined and made sense to build the structure around. If the interview had been more concise when we shot it, then I would have, at this point, been able to use more interview moments and be less concerned about B-roll to illustrate and cover up cut points. However, this shorter edit was meant to be the opening video for a talk that was being given at a conference. So engaging visuals accompanied by our banging audio track was definitely going to be what this video needed. I went through all the B-roll from the afternoon and made my selects, knowing already that we didn't have most of what we'd need to illustrate this. But fortunately, I had two things to work with. Firstly, a press kit from the client's client. That included some footage of some of the elements they'd been discussing, and I had access to the client's stock website login. So I headed there to fill in the blanks, some very literally and some more interpretively. I don't love stock footage at the best of times, particularly from some of the cheaper platforms. But for something like this, I really don't think it matters all too much. It serves the purpose that the client needs it to serve. If there was budget enough for a grade, then I'm sure a good colorist could have made this all sit in a world that feels a bit more cohesive. But unfortunately, there wasn't. So the semi-terrible grades you're seeing here are my handiwork. Without spending too much time as I'm aware of budget and without having little to any skill in the world of color. This has always been my weakness, and I don't see myself cracking it anytime soon the way the legends in the game can. So having B-rolled and finessed to a point that I was happy with, I uploaded it to Frame.io and sent over my first edit to Sabine. And then as far as the client comments and feedback went, it was incredibly painless. I think that's partly because I really listened to Sabine with her requests up front, partly because she trusts my judgment, and partly because having worked with this company now for 10 years, I've come to learn what they do and don't like. They are, as people, quite relaxed, and comparatively to some of the agencies I work with, just a lot easier to please. I added back in a line, a few additional bits of stock to make this extension work, and then we were done. I say we were done. The longer edit is still to be done. But this will serve as a great foundation for it, and with Sabine's help in getting the selects down, I'm optimistic we can get it finished in the quoted for 3 days, as I know the company is on a tight production budget this year. Not my finest work by a long shot, but as I'm always trying to, the best I was able to achieve within the constraints of both money and time. Producers, agency and clients watching, regardless, I don't actually do many of these jobs anymore in my life. But if it's something that you'd like to see more of, let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to share when I do. For a look at a more considered job with considerably more budget, you should watch this video next. Please like the video below, it really helps. And if you still haven't, make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.